of 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, including this one with Megan Fox playing the role of April. And one thing that Megan Fox said, you really have to be a fan of something like Ghostbusters or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and certainly what she said on the Ellen DeGeneres show when doing an interview promoting the upcoming release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was that you had to be a huge fan, and I think that same kind of statement applies to Ghostbusters. Any celebrities going to be making appearances in Ghostbusters really have to be a fan of Ghostbusters and really have to know the history that goes with Ghostbusters, because you wouldn't think it, but there's a lot of history that goes with Ghostbusters and what the story behind, the derivement of the whole group and the reason why they do what they do, why they're so interested in paranormal activity. I really have to give it up for the creators of the cartoon for putting so much detail behind the cartoon, everything from the theme song to the visuals for the original cartoon. That was one of the most detailed cartoons that was dropped back in the 1980s, 1990s, especially in the early 90s for me. Watching Ghostbusters, I considered that to be a blessing and a privilege because it was so fun to watch it, especially on the weekends, because it was one of the most unpredictable cartoons that they had back when I was watching cartoons at a very young age, and it was so fun to watch it from episode to episode because you never knew what was going to happen. And it makes me wonder, whatever happened to original 90s cartoons and even 80s cartoons like Garfield and Inspector Gadget. I really miss those cartoons. That's why I'm really big on cartoon networks like Teletoon Retro that always bring you back to an era that you were always familiar with, and an era to you that never seemingly died and was eventually replaced by all these cartoons like SpongeBob SquarePants that make no sense to me whatsoever. SpongeBob SquarePants, Tough Puppy, Fairly Odd Parents. I mean, where did cartoons of 1980, 1990 go? It's going to be fun seeing Ghostbusters 3 redistributed in 3D for the first time ever, coming up in 2015. Really happy they put it off until 2015 because that will get the anticipation up for the release of Ghostbusters. It's not like it's immediately coming to theaters. They're giving it a substantial amount of time to promote the movie, so you're going to be really excited. You're going to be filled to the maximum with anticipation on the release of this. They're doing the same kind of thing with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're over-promoting the movie. You can kind of look at it as being over-promoted, but they're holding back on the release of the first live-action Turtles in over almost 25 years because they want you to be really excited when it finally drops theatrically. It's going to be coming out in the first part of August, and they're going to be doing the same thing with Ghostbusters. I think it's going to be one of the biggest releases of the summer of next year. We're a little under a year away from the release of Ghostbusters 3, and I think it's going to be number one in the box office. It may not occupy the number one position for an immediate amount of time. It might not occupy the number one position for, say, the entire month that it plays, but it'll definitely occupy the number one position when it's released in the summer or early part of the fall in 2015 for at least 2 weeks out of the 4 that it will be spun multiple times per day theatrically in the month that it is released, and I'm expecting a lot of competition to be released around the same time for Ghostbusters. It'll all depend on when the filmmakers want to release their films to compete with other films they're going to be competing against, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of competition Ghostbusters 3 will go up against. Again, if you haven't seen the trailer for Ghostbusters 3, you can go to our Facebook page at HCW Entertainment and check out the trailer. It runs for about 2 minutes in length. It's one of the longer trailers, and you can go to our Twitter at JonathanClarke1 and leave your opinion in the comments of this video blog on our YouTube channel. And by the way, if this video blog isn't enough for you, we are on Google's Blogger as well, and we posted a blog on the release of Ghostbusters 3, including the trailer for Cheap Shots with Jonathan Clarke exclusively on Google's Blogger. We've also linked Blogger up to our YouTube channel at Jonathan Clarke 22. You can see the trailer virtually everywhere on our website, and that just puts into perspective for you how much of a fan I have always been of Ghostbusters, and that's why I'm really excited on the release of this. I'm just as excited on the release of Ghostbusters 3 as I was Maleficent earlier this year. Maleficent was a huge draw theatrically. It generated millions of dollars, and within the first week of its release it was number one, and I predict kind of the same future for Ghostbusters 3 with how popular the original cartoon was, how much merchandise Ghostbusters have sold over the years, and based off the previous success of movies that may have been released back in the 80s, but based on the previous success of Ghostbusters 1 and 2 with Dan Aykroyd in one of the lead roles and many other great actors and actresses making up the cast of Ghostbusters, the theme song, the detail. I mean, you can't go wrong with Ghostbusters 3. Now, it may disappoint. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say everything positive about Ghostbusters 3 because there may be a lot of negative negative reviews, especially within the first few days of the release of this movie and the first few people go to see it. There are obviously going to be negative reviews about it. There will be something about Ghostbusters 3 that you don't like, and I don't blame you for being disappointed, especially with how successful the previous first two were, and you may prefer the original Ghostbusters over Ghostbusters 3. But the thing is, Ghostbusters 3 is going to be really, really updated. You're going to have an updated script, an updated storyline, updated special effects, and I think the special effects are really going to tell the story of Ghostbusters 3. It's going to be distributed in a far more effective way, especially with the ability now to release Ghostbusters 3 in 3D and make more money in terms of cash flow for Ghostbusters 3. And I will say this, they did this with Pirates of the Caribbean years ago. They're going to spend on Ghostbusters 3. They're going to spend on Ghostbusters 3 because they know how popular the original Ghostbusters movies were, and they will spend. They spend on the entire series of Pirates of the Caribbean, and I think that we're going to see them spend on Ghostbusters 3 to make this movie one of the most successful of the summer and the early part of the fall in 2015, and that's usually what they do. If a movie is spent in the way of a lot of money, then you know the movie is expected to be a huge draw, and everybody knows the history of Ghostbusters. If you don't know the history of Ghostbusters, where have you been for the last 30 years? I don't have to go down through a detailed rundown of the history of Ghostbusters because every listener of this radio program pretty much knows the history of Ghostbusters. Everybody knows what to kind of expect. The only thing we don't know what to expect for this movie is what kind of adversary the Ghostbusters will be faced with. The trailer looks very detailed, and they kind of tease what the adversary is going to be. It involves a power outage, and it involves having to call the Ghostbusters when all else fails. But what kind of adversary, really, when it comes down to it, are the Ghostbusters going to be faced with? Is it enough to put together a 2-hour-long motion picture event? I think it will be. I think this movie will run anywhere from 97 minutes to 120 minutes in length, easily getting up to the 2-hour mark, and I see it generating a lot in terms of cash flow and a lot of great reviews of this movie, because I would venture to say that every fan of theatrical releases, every at least 1 through 5 fan of theatrical releases is a fan of Ghostbusters. I mean, who out there wasn't a fan of Ghostbusters? And like Megan Fox said on the Ellen DeGeneres show, you really have to be a fan of something like Ghostbusters to really go see the theatrical release and be into it as much as you were the original cartoon. You had to be just as much into the theatrical releases of Ghostbusters as you were the original cartoon. Do not go and see this movie if you were never a fan of Ghostbusters or became familiarized with the Ghostbusters characters. But again, who didn't? And I will go on record for saying that this movie will have something for every member of the entire family, and that's usually what I do with a lot of my movie reviews prior to having seen them and prior to their releases, is give them the benefit of the doubt. And I will say this, it will have something for every member of the entire family, no matter even if you were a fan of Ghostbusters. I mean, this movie seems to have the total package, and there's really no reason why we can't give this movie the benefit of the doubt. I think it's one of the few movies that is released very rarely that you can kind of go ahead and give the benefit of the doubt to, because no doubt they'll have a phenomenal writing team for Ghostbusters 3. They'll have a phenomenal technical staff which will really up the special effects of this one, and the cast are going to be promoting it on shows like Ellen DeGeneres, The Talk. They're going to be all over the place promoting this to get this movie over. They're going to do everything that's required of them to do to promote it. I see a lot of promotion going behind this. The advertising has already been put in place on YouTube. For fuck's sake, they've already released the trailers for Ghostbusters, and we're a little under a year away from the release of this one. But again, it gives the movie a lot of promotion, and anything with a lot of promotion can be looked at in one of two ways. The first way is it's over-promoted, and it could result in the movie being a clusterfuck, and the promotion that it's getting could result in the movie being one of the biggest movies ever released by a movie corporation and occupy the #1 spot for a substantial amount of time. And that's the way I see Ghostbusters going, because I am choosing, as a movie reviewer and a radio show host, to give this one the benefit of the doubt. And it's not because I've been a huge fan of things like Alvin and the Chipmunks, Yogi Bear, Beetlejuice, and now Ghostbusters for seemingly forever. I will admit to you that I've always been a huge fan of things like Beetlejuice, Ghostbusters, Yogi Bear, things like that, and that's probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. But more so, I'm giving this movie the benefit of the doubt, choosing to do that because it just looks awesome. There's really nothing negative that I can find to talk about in relation to Ghostbusters 3. Now, you may prefer the original releases of Ghostbusters from the 1980s when it's all said and done. I'm not going to hold anything against you for doing that, but I do want your opinion on the release of Ghostbusters 3, and I want to know what you think. And you can leave me your opinion at the bottom of this YouTube video, on our YouTube channel at Jonathan Clarke 1, on our Twitter at Jonathan Clarke 1 and on our YouTube channel at Jonathan Clarke 22. Let me know what you think of the release of Ghostbusters 3, and if you have Google+, you can join the conversation with us on there at HGW Entertainment to get news updates from our website, updates on our YouTube videos, and more. And if you want to register for our forum, you can do that on our website by creating a username and password. You can sign in to get in on the conversation about things like Ghostbusters, which is one of our featured topics on our website of more recency. And I want to know what you think of this. Are you excited about this? On a scale of 5 stars, here we go with the 5-star scale perspective rating. I can easily give this movie at least 3.5 out of 5 stars, taking it 2.5 stars off because of the uncertainty that I have of the success of this movie thus far. I do have some certainty in the way of success for it, but I'm not all 100% there for the success of it because it could be a blowout with how much promotion this has. The other way of looking at it is how it's being promoted. Could consider it to be an overrated movie and just talked about that much that you're tired of hearing about it by the time it's released. There are a lot of contributing X factors that could lead to this film's demise, but I don't see it right now in the halfway point of 2014. That's what we're at here in 2014, and we're just a little under a year away. I'm expecting the release of this one to drop in the early part of the summer of 2014 or the early part of the fall, kind of like how Maleficent was dropped in the early part of the spring this year. With how much anticipation that film had, it had an anticipation of months and months and months before it was released. Fans were anticipating the release of this and the retelling of the Sleeping Beauty story, and I posted a lot of interviews about that with the cast of Maleficent and how excited they were on the release of the movie, and it got over. So I see Ghostbusters 3 falling kind of into that same kind of category, but only time will tell. It's been said many times before, time is the most precious commodity